we were to go around and list all the problems with our society, I think we could take, everybody would have something to share, right? Something that's wrong with our culture, our society. But I think one of the big things that's wrong with our culture and our society comes out of a good intent. And that is that we have outsourced charity to try to make it more efficient. But because we have outsourced charity, it's completely separated from us. So the desire is, like, let's make sure no one's in poverty, so let's give money to the government, and the government can take care of people because they're really good at stuff. And so we'll give them money. And so we pay taxes, or we give extra money, or whatever it is that we do to take care of the poor. And maybe you're like us, and you give money to the church, and you say, well, okay, people need help, they can get help through the church, so I give money to the church, and the church can help people. Maybe you give money to the Red Cross. Maybe you give money, you donate to food pantries, whatever it is. And none of those are bad things except for the taxes. None of those are bad things. But what's happened is there's a disconnect between us and the giving. And it's almost becomes a I gave at the office kind of mentality, where I've already given. And everybody's always, the people that don't deserve it are asking for money all the time. Like Walmart's like, hey, can you donate a little bit money so we can get a bigger tax write-off and pretend this is our donation? Like we're doing that kind of thing all the time. And there's a cynicism that gets built up when it comes to charity. There's I already gave at the office kind of mentality that gets built up. And that becomes a problem because whenever there's somebody around us that needs help, we're almost checked out of the situation, because we've already done our part. Or it becomes so awkward because it becomes a shame-based thing to need something nobody's willing to ask because they don't want to be one of those people. When God set up the only government God has ever set up, He set up a way to take care of people, but it wasn't a government structure to take care of them. People could go to the temple and they could get, or go to the tabernacle, depending on what point it is. There was food distributed there was that, but mostly the way that people in need were cared for was one-on-one. It was individual. He said, your community takes care of your community. Your family takes care of your family. And there's some really cool laws that he set up to take care of people. I've talked about this before, but I just think they're really cool. You weren't supposed to harvest the corners of your fields. When you would harvest, you would not harvest the corners. Now, whenever we would mow hay, back in the few times that I was involved with that, we didn't mow the corner of the fields because the tractor wouldn't get over there in the corner. But they didn't left those corners so that the poor among them could have something to harvest, and the harvest could go, they could go there. There's a rule that if you're collecting all the sheaves of grain and you're taking them back to the barn or wherever it is that you're going to store them or process them, that if you forget a sheaf, you're supposed to leave it. Because if you forgot the sheaf, the idea is that God is the one that caused you to forget that because somebody in need needed it. And if you left that, then you can go get that. Whenever you would go through and beat the olive trees or pick grapes, you were only supposed to make one pass. You weren't supposed to go back and get the left, because whatever stayed on the tree was designated by God to the poor. And so there's all these rules about the poor. But there's a different category. When we think of the poor, we're thinking about people that are homeless or people that have absolutely nothing. That there's a different category of people than just the homeless, the poor, the single mom. There's a different category. And that is like people that are just like you and I, families that are in hard times, that are just dealing with something difficult. And I honestly, you may not believe me, I'm being 100% honest when I say I did not connect my sermon today with the fact that we're taking up a love offering for a family need. That's entirely God. It didn't occur to me just a minute ago. But there's a category of people that's just people like us that are not different than us, just regular people with jobs in need. And the way that we respond to them, because of the way that we do things in our society, can get a little mixed up. We're almost like, well, they don't really need help because they're just like me and my situation's the same as their situation. Do they really need help? And there's a specific law in Deuteronomy 15. Moses is giving his last sermon to the Israelites before he departs, which if you think about the book of Deuteronomy, if you try to sit down and read it at once, and then think about Moses preaching this as a sermon, you'll think my sermons are short. But he's talking to them and reminding them about the law before he dies. And he talks to them in Deuteronomy 15:7 about this category of people that's not the homeless, it's not the poor, but it's people that get on hard times and are having trouble, and what our response to them should be. Deuteronomy 15:7 says, if among you one of your brothers should become poor. So it's not like, hey, this is the indigent in the land. This is not a widow. This is not foreigners that have moved in with nothing. This is just one of your people. If they fall on hard times in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the 7th year, the year of release is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry to the Lord against you, and you be guilty of sin. So the situation that he's describing here is there's somebody he's got a job, he's got a business, he's got a farm or whatever, but hard times hit, and he's having trouble. And when he comes to you and he says, hey, I have a need, help him. But this is different. This is not a gift necessarily, but it's a loan. He says it's just a loan to help them out, to help them get by. But it's also an understanding that this loan might very well turn into a gift. Because every 7 years, and the way that they did things every 50 years, at the end of 7 years, there's a 7-year period, and it wasn't from the start of the loan, but it's from the day that they were issuing this law. Every 7th year was a Sabbath year. It was a year that they were supposed to let the land rest. They were supposed to rest. They were supposed to take every 7th year off just to take a break and to allow the land to take a break and spend that year in worship and trust God to provide for them in that year. But also what was supposed to happen is they were supposed to forgive debts that year. So if somebody owed you money and they couldn't pay it back, and so they became an indentured servant, which would be listed as a slave here, but I want to make sure there's a difference between those two. Somebody says, I'm going to work for you to pay off my debt. At the end of 7 years, they would be released, depending on how the agreement worked out. They would be released. And so the interest level varied on loans, or the way that they could do the loans, because they weren't really supposed to do interest. But the way that they did the loans and the way it was supposed to be paid back was all structured based on when those 7 years were up, because you want your money back at the end of those 7 years. If you owned a piece of land because God had given your family that land and you sold it, it could only be sold for a certain period of time, and that was a little bit longer than the 7 years. But it would have to be returned, and so they structured that. So what he's saying here is, you're going to loan somebody the money because they need help. And if you're on year 1, you might be generous and loan them that money because they've got 7 years to pay it back, and it'll probably get paid back. But if you're on year 6, you might not loan them that money because you say, well, the loan's going to be forgiven next year. They're not going to get it paid back, so I'm not going to help this person in need because I'm not going to get my money back. And he says, look, when somebody around you is in need and you have the ability to help them, whether that's through a loan, whether that's through a gift or whatever it is, but you know that there's a chance it's not going to get repaid, don't hold back helping them because you might not get repaid. And your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother and give him nothing, because if you do that, he will cry to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty of sin for not helping someone in need because of what it might cost you. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him, because for this the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, to the poor in your land. So he issues this command, and he says, helping people, helping the widows, helping orphans, helping the indigent, that's all one thing. But when it comes time to help somebody else that's like you, that's in a similar position to you, don't restrain your hand for them because you look at them and say, why should I help them? They're just like me. Why should I help them? They didn't manage their money right. Why should I help them? They didn't do this right. Why should I help them? They might not repay it. Instead, you understand that God looks after the needy, and you don't call to him. If they will call to him for help if you're not willing to help. So he gives them this command and says, help those in need, regardless of what you think of their situation, regardless of their status relative to you. Help those in need, regardless of what you're going to get back for. Now, we have to be really careful with this because we are not Jews under the Old Covenant. And so this law is not a law for us. And we have to be really careful about that when we start saying, well, the Deuteronomy says this, so we have to do this. Because this was a law as part of the agreement given between God and his people, Israel. And we are not under that law. We are not required to follow these commands as commands. But what we find out from this, we find out some really important things about what God cares about. And that's mostly what we're looking at as New Testament believers looking at the law. We want to say, what does God care about? What are the priorities of God? What are the things that I should do to be more like him? And these kinds of commands are things that we should pay attention to because he gives us a clear idea of what he cares about and how he feels when it comes to the poor, when it comes to the needy. And I hate saying the poor, okay? I hate saying the poor because I don't want us to create this separate category and think San Francisco homeless person. That's not what I'm wanting us to think about. But people in your situation that are in hard times, what should our response be? Because we would all agree God cares about the poor, people at the bottom of the ladder. But the idea that we, as people who should be responsible for ourselves, we get this idea that God's like shaking his finger at us saying, you should have done better. But the response, the thing that he's given us is he's talking about people who are at a situation where they're just having a hard time. And he tells us what he thinks about them, what his attitude is to them, and what his attitude is to us based on that. The first thing he tells us is that God is an ally to the needy. Verse 9, take care, lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart and you say, the seventh year, the year of release is near. Again, that's, I might not get paid back because the loan's going to be forgiven. And your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother and you give him nothing. Why? Why should you be careful about that? Because he might cry to the Lord against you. He might say to God, God, you've helped that person. You've given to that person. That person and I are no different, except I'm having hard times and he's not having hard times. And that person will not help me. And he cries to God and says, teach him a lesson about how quickly his situation can become my situation. And the implication here from Moses is that God will do it because God is an ally to those in need. It doesn't say God is an ally to those who are in need through no fault of their own. It doesn't say God is an ally to those in need whose parents left them a legacy of debt and they didn't have any choice and college loans and all of that. It says, regardless of the situation, God is an ally to those in need. And you say, well, why would God be an ally to somebody even if they're making bad choices? Why would he be an ally to them? Well, let me ask you this. Let's take money out of the equation because God doesn't care about money. What is money to God? Like, do you think he needs pictures of our presidents? Is that what God cares about? He doesn't care about that. God cares about need. So let's talk about this. If God was not an ally to the needy, where would we be? Because what God did is he looked at his creation that had made good decisions? No. At a creation that had rebelled against him and said, we don't want him to be our God. We want to be our own gods. But then when we got in trouble, we needed help. And what did he do? He was an ally to those in need, regardless of the way that they got there. And he came to us, lived among us, died on our behalf, and he offers forgiveness to anyone who will manage what they have well, to anyone who makes good choices, to anyone who always shows up to church and makes sure that they give their 10%. He extends grace and forgiveness to those in need, to any who will believe. He is an ally to the needy. And we talk about money a lot. That's what we're focused on is money. But he is not just an ally to those in financial need, But he is an ally to all of those in need, and what he wants is for us to be the same. Why? Because he extended what we needed to us, and how dare we not extend the same grace and mercy to others in need. Moses says, if you're not willing to help those in need when you have the ability to help those in need, regardless of their situation, you're not willing to help in the way that you can, you need to understand that God is going to help them. And if they cry out to you, you might just find yourself in the exact same situation. We find out that God is an ally to the needy, but he's also an enemy to the greedy. The end of verse 9 says that not just are they going to cry out to God and God might hear and help, but we are actually guilty of sin when we refuse to help those in need. What about the reasons? Look, you're going to have to work that out. It's smart to help people and not just enable people. That makes good decision. That's a wise thing to do, to help people and not just enable people. But when you say, I'm not going to help because I might not get it back, I'm not going to help because they should have made better choices, I'm not going to help, that you're actually in danger of committing sin by refusing to help. Because God is an ally to the needy. And for us to say, you know what, that's good enough for God. God might be cool wasting his resources that way, but I am not, is a sin. God is an ally to the needy, and he's an enemy to the greedy. But God blesses those who are generous. Verse 10, you shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him, because for this the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake. The Lord will bless you whenever you say, I'm going to help regardless of whether I'm able to get it back or not. That God blesses those who do that. Now, we look at these things and we see what God cares about. That God is an ally, God is an enemy, God blesses those who are willing to help. God does all these things. But in so doing, we also expose the attitudes that cause us the problems. Because when we say, I'm not going to help, I'm not going to get in that, what we do is we expose our attitude toward the poor. Verse 7 says, if among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart. He says that someone who is not willing to help is, what are they doing? They're hardening their own heart. They're saying, I'm not going to show compassion. I'm not going to have sympathy on that person. I'm not going to look at that person and say, what would I do in that situation? What do I need in that situation? That I'm actually going to harden my heart. And your attitude towards the poor, towards those in need, towards those just like you, your attitude towards the poor determines whether God is going to be your enemy in this situation or whether he's going to bless you in this situation. Your attitude toward money is exposed by this. Take care lest an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say the seventh year, the end of year of release is near, and you look grudgingly on your poor brother. Your attitude towards your money is exposed because you look at that person and you say, you know what? It's mine. And I'm not going to help them because I might lose it. It's mine. I'm not going to give up what's mine. God's given this to me, or I've given this to myself. I've made this to myself. I've taken care of my resources. They've not taken care of their resources. I'm going to look at them and I'm going to say, sorry, this is mine. This money is mine. And what it does is it exposes your attitude about your money. That you look at your money and you've decided, you know what? This money is mine and I'm going to hold it to myself. It's not for anybody else. It's for me. But I think the most important thing that does it is exposes our attitude toward God. Where does what you have come from? Where does what you have come from? God takes care of me all the time. Everything that I have comes from God. We get all these things that God takes care of us with. Sometimes he takes care of me through money. The church pays me, and I have money to take care of things. But God also takes care of me in other ways. Last Sunday afternoon, while I was driving to Batesville to pick up my kids, I actually only made it to Russellville, my wife and kids. You were there. When I go pick all of them up and come back, God was providing for me. Nate and David were in Nate's garage replacing the starter on my truck so that I wouldn't have any more sermon illustrations and so that I could... Who did that for me? Well, they did that for me, but God was the one providing for that. God is the one that made it possible for us to be able to do things by watching YouTube videos and make that happen. God provided for me on that. God provides for me through you. He helps me through you helping me with things. Individually, taking care of us. God provides for us in ways just dropping things off at our house and showing things up that I have no idea how that happened. God provides for us. But when I start thinking, you know what, I'm the one that makes this happen. I'm the one that makes this happen. I'm the one that provides for myself. I'm the one that takes care of myself. I'm the one that's out there getting it done. It is me. I'm doing all of this. Then we have a problem because God is actually the one that provides for all these things. And when our attitude towards the poor is, I'm not going to help that person because it's mine, our attitude is actually towards God that says, He is not my provider, I'm my provider. I'm the one that takes care of me. And if they would take care of themselves better, they wouldn't be in that position. When we're unwilling to help the poor, when we're unwilling to help someone in need, in a situation that we ourselves could be in, it exposes that our attitude towards our brothers are terrible, exposes that our attitude towards our money is bad, and exposes that we do not trust God as our provider. We think we are our own providers. So, as we look at this, I just want you to ask yourself a question. When you look at your attitude towards those in need, are you someone that is an ally to the poor like God is, or are you someone that's an enemy to God because of your unwillingness to help those in need? Are you someone that has a healthy attitude towards money and you say, you know what, I've got this under control. I understand where God provides for me. God provides for me and takes care of me, so I'm free to do this. Or are you holding on to that money because you made it and you need it and nobody else is going to take care of you but you? What is your attitude toward those in need showing you about yourself? Because if you're somebody that you look at yourself and you say, you know what, I do have this attitude. I have the attitude that I have already given at the office. I've already helped somebody else. They don't need it. I'm in the same situation that they're in. So if I can make it, they can make it. They don't need help. If they just done a better job managing their money, they would be in a better position and they wouldn't need this help. Where do you find yourself in this? If you find yourself there, then I've got some suggestions for you about how to become more generous. First of all, I want to encourage you to get control of your money. One of the reasons that we don't help people that are in need is because we don't know if we can make it. We have so little control over our money, we have so little control over what's going on that we don't know if we can afford to help or not. Or we know that we can't afford to help regardless of how much money we're making. Because we have so obligated ourselves that we do not have the ability to help other people. You're making more money than you've ever made in your life, making more money than your parents ever dreamed of making. But you can't help anybody else because you've got so much debt. Because your truck payment and your car payment and your house payment and all your 14 online streaming subscriptions and everything else that you have obligated yourself to are so expensive that regardless of how much money you have, you cannot afford to help anybody else. You got to get control of that. Because God has not blessed you with all of that so you have more that you can spend on yourself, but He has blessed you with that so you have the ability to help others when the time comes. And the shame of our society that we have this much money floating around, but we have none to share because we have so obligated ourselves to other things. If you want to become generous, you've got to start by getting control of your money. You have to know how much you're making and what you're spending. Because if you're not in control of it, you don't have the ability to help. Get in control of it. And give yourself some margin when it comes to your money. Don't leave yourself so locked in and say, well, I can afford it because I make X dollars and so I'm going to spend X amount of dollars. But instead, if you want to be generous if you want to have the attitude that God has and you want to be available to help people when He presents needs to you, get control of it so that you have the ability to help when the time arises. How do I become more generous? Once you've got control of your money, you need to give to God. This is not a tithing sermon. I'm not challenging you to give more offerings, although you can. I'm not going to stop you from doing that. This is not what this is about. But what giving to God on a regular basis does is it frees up the hold that money has on us. When you decide, you know what, I'm going to give the 10% that Scripture suggests, or I'm going to give whatever it is that I feel led to give, when you say, I'm going to give to God regularly, what that does is it breaks the hold that money has on you. Because money has this hold on you that says you can't let go. This is your money. You're hanging on to it. You made it. You put all the effort into this. And you say, I can't let that go. This is my money. But when you say, you know what, this is not my money. God has given me this money. God is giving me these opportunities. God has given me the opportunity to have this education and this position. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to acknowledge God as my provider by giving a set amount to Him every month. It breaks the hold that money has on you because you say, I can't give any of it up. But you know what? You're already giving part of it up. You're already saying, I'm giving a certain percentage as an offering back to God already. And that breaks the hold that money has on you that says, I can't share any of that because you start sharing some of it right then. And it releases that hardness of heart that says, I got to hold on to all of this for myself and opens you up to that. And what God says about this is the same thing that Moses says in Deuteronomy. When he says that if you will share with those in need, what happens is that God will bless you in what you're doing. Jesus says the same thing in Luke chapter 16, verse 10. It says, one who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? It says that God is the one that's provided for you. And if God has provided for you, and you acknowledge God by using that money the way that He wants you to, then God provides you with more opportunities to do that. If you're faithful in a little bit, He will provide you more opportunities. Verse 12 says, if you've not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. He says that if you decide, you know what, I'm going to submit this money to God, and I'm going to use it the way that He wants to, then God is going to bless you with more opportunities. And I don't want to slip into this. I don't want you to hear me slipping into the prosperity gospel, and if you just give a seed, then God's going to do all this stuff. God, this is a promise of Jesus that you will not go broke helping other people. You're not going to fall through the cracks because you're honoring God. If you will honor God with what you have, He is going to take care of you. That might mean that He gives you more wealth. It might mean that He just makes sure that you're taken care of. But if you refuse to help because you say, I can't trust God to take care of me, then you're going to find that no matter how much you have less and less to take care of you. He promises the same thing that Moses said, that if you will help those in need, if you will do what it is that God has called you to do, then He will take care of you. He goes even farther than that in Malachi chapter 3. This is the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi 3:10. It says, bring the full tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing until there is no more need. People were not giving as they were supposed to. They weren't giving as God had commanded to because they were worried that God wasn't going to take care of them. They were worried that they didn't have enough. And He said, try me. Give what it is that I've called you to give and see if I don't provide for you. See if I don't open the doors for you. We hold back our willingness to help people because we're afraid or because we're greedy. We can't help until we get control of the money. We just can't do it until you get control of the money. But once you get control of the money, it's really easy to just say, I've got control of the money, I'm going to hang on to it for myself. But the way that we break through that is by giving to God first. And sometimes we're afraid to do that. We're afraid to step out. We give 10% of our income. That's a lot of money, guys. And I mean, it's not as much as some of y'all, but it's a lot of money that we're going out. 10% of our income going out every month. And that's scary. Because my kids eat a lot. But God always takes care of us, and that giving opens the door for us to be generous in other ways, generous in other areas, because we see God take care of us on 90% of our income. And if we can see that, then we trust God when it comes to giving Him more, because He's the one that's going to take care of us. So, get control of your money and be generous to God. Finally, the last advice I want to give you when it comes to becoming generous, and this is going to be a short sermon to make up for last week. The last piece of advice I want to give you is to plan generosity. You want to become generous? Plan generosity. Take some of your money and say, you know what? This money, we don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot, but we got some, so we're going to set aside this money. We're going to take a $20 bill. We're going to take $500, whatever it is for you. We're going to set this money aside to help someone else this month. Someone else in need is going to be taken care of with this money this month. And we're not going to give it to the Red Cross. We're not just going to give it to the church. We're not just going to outsource this, but we are going to give this. And then here's what I want you to do. Pray that God will open the door to help somebody else. Pray that God will show you someone in need that you can be generous to. Well, how much do I need to give? That's not my business. You give whatever it is that God leads you to give. But if you want to become generous, if you want to become an ally to the needy, you want to see God bless you in what you're doing because you are using things the way that He wants you to, get control of your money, give to God, and plan to be generous. Pick an amount that you say, this is going to help someone in need, and ask God to show you who that is. The things that hold us back from being generous are fear and greed. Fear that there's not going to be enough. That if I help somebody else, I'm not going to have enough. But if God is your provider, what do you have to be afraid of? If you're afraid and you're not willing to help somebody else, and I'm not just talking about tithes, I'm talking about helping someone else in need. If you're afraid to give because you're not going to have enough, that is a heart problem. It's an attitude problem. Because God has always taken care of me. And you're here. So I'm assuming you have not died of starvation yet. God has always taken care of you, and He has the ability to take care of you far more than what you currently need. If you're afraid to help, it's because you're doing a bad job managing your money or because you're not trusting Him. Get it under control and help Him. It's either fear or it's greed. Greed that says, this is my money. I made this. I'm taking care of this. I'm the one that's out there working. It is for me. And guys, that is a recipe for disaster. Because He is the one that provides for you. And if you start thinking you are the one that provides for yourself, you are setting yourself up as an enemy to God, and He will take you down a peg. He will remind you where things come from. There are people all over Northwest Arkansas that were riding high and said, I'm making more money than I've ever made in my life, more than my parents ever dreamed of. And some executive at Walmart decides they're done. And it's all gone in a moment. Everything that you're being greedy about can be gone tomorrow. Every bit of it. And if you say, I'm not going to help because it's mine, you are in a dangerous position. Because you're setting yourself up as a rival to God, and He will remind you where you stand. So as we enter the season of giving, as we enter the time where we're talking about generosity more and more and more, here's what I want to encourage you to do. Stop outsourcing your giving. You want to help people, you want to help organizations, you want to do that. Give your tithes here. I'm not discouraging you from doing that. I really appreciate being paid. I'm not discouraging you from doing any of that, but I want you to look at this and say, God commanded them to give tithes. He commanded them to give offerings. And He said, on top of all of that, When someone around you is in need, help them. And I want to encourage you to stop outsourcing all of that. And instead, pick an amount of money that you and your family can spare and pray that God would give you an opportunity to help someone this month. Because the heart of God is to be an ally to the needy. So this month, you're going to spend a lot of money on yourself. You're going to spend a lot of money on your family. You're going to give a lot of presents. You're going to do all this stuff. But I want to encourage you to remember that all of this comes from Him and not you. And His desire is that you will be an ally to those in need. Not just to the homeless, not just to single moms in battered women's shelters, but to the poor among you. Those among you who would not be poor 6 months ago, but those among you who are struggling because of circumstances in their lives. Because He is an ally to them. And so should we be. Would you stand with me as we pray? Our Heavenly Father, we come before you right now, and I thank you so much that you've given us an opportunity to gather together and look at this. Lord, as I see that you are an ally to the needy, I just want to say thank you for that. That you are not someone who just looks at those with wealth like we do. We look at those with wealth and prefer them. We look at people with lots of stuff and they get elevated in our society, but rather you look at those in need and are an ally to them. And I'm grateful that you didn't look for us to manage our lives well before you were willing to offer the sacrifice of Jesus, but rather you offered the sacrifice of Jesus while we were yet sinners. And I ask, Lord, that if there's anyone here today that does not know you, even though this is a sermon about money, that they would see the gift that you have offered them and they would accept the gift of grace that you've offered them today. Lord, if there's anyone here that's got the hard heart that says, I'm not willing to help those around me, I'm not willing to help other people in need unless they've demonstrated that they've made all the right choices, unless they've demonstrated that they have had a harder time than me, Lord, I ask that you would soften our hearts to see that you are the only reason that we are where we are, and that you call us to be as generous with others as you have been with us. I ask, Lord, that we would be a church that gives to the church and the ministries of the church, but also that gives to one another, that helps one another when in need. Whether it's financially, whether it's replacing a starter on a truck, whatever it may be, Lord, that you would soften our hearts to be like you when it comes to those in need. And I ask that you would give us more people in need, Lord, that we might be your hands and feet to them. I thank you for all you've done for us, and it's in Jesus' name I pray.